and welcome. It is the third hour, show 5086 of the morning show with Preston Scott. Grant Allen running the program. And, of course, here in Studio 1B, I am sequestered, but I am joined by the Secretary of Corrections for the state of Florida, Ricky Dixon. Good to have you back, sir. How are you?
It's good to be here, Preston. Doing well.
Last time we talked, we covered a lot of ground, and I think a lot of people had a transformative kind of experience, because I think in the last segment when I talked about the fact that a lot of people hear Secretary of Corrections and they think prisons, but it's corrections. Am I far off in that distinction? There's a difference?
No, not at all. I say that a lot. Actually, when we talk to our staff, let's remember we're not the Department of Prisons or the Department of Corrections. We have a purpose, and that corrections mission is very much a part of what we do. It can't be secondary to everything else. It's embedded in our very being and existence as a corrections agency.
As I talk about 20,000 plus returning citizens every year in the state and the importance of addressing that, is that something that's on the radar of the correctional system nationally? And if so, how many states are giving it focus as you are here in Florida?
I think most are. I think it's a conversation that I've seen evolve over the last, at least 4 or 5 years, decades really now, to different extents in different states. There's different focus, both in terms of narratives and resources applied
sure.
to its success. I think a lot of states, though, are probably like we were. We had some, if I go back several years, we had some really good programs that we were proud of. But if you impact 25 people in a population of 80,000, what are you doing? You've got to focus on programs you can scale up and have the greatest impact with the greatest number of people, and tie those programs to real jobs. And so that level of sophistication in the past, probably in a lot of other states and in Florida as well, I'm not sure was there. We had various programs we'd offer, but I think we're moving in a direction with the support of the Florida Foundation for Correctional Excellence. And just a real shout out to you and those other board members that are on that board. Appreciate the intellectual level and the business experience and that they bring, but we're trying to, take our level of operation to a new level in terms of really identifying the program needs relative to the job market today, relative to the locations, geographic locations these individuals are going to, and to make our system work to complement those employment needs and instead of work against it. So a lot in that area is being done.
Let's talk about the progress made. Last time we talked, legislative session was rolling along. The last House, Senate, the governor, of course, it seemed as though it was a good, productive session for corrections. Break that down. Was it?
It absolutely was. And I can tell you with all honesty, I'm not sure I'd be doing this right now if it were not for Governor DeSantis and his support and understanding of the needs of corrections. First of all, you hear him say this all the time, and I appreciate it so much as a taxpayer and a citizen of Florida. There's a recognition that Florida has to be safe, to have tourists want to come here, to have people want to move here and live. That's at the root of that being successful for Florida, for our state. And I think in the past with various leaders, there's not necessarily, there's always been that appreciation of law enforcement and their role in the judiciary. But the back end of this criminal justice system is corrections. We're the receiving back end of that system. And the corrections has to be supported for us to be successful at all those things for public safety in Florida. And not only, and I think here's the missing link, and I think we're doing better at educating folks and speaking about it more, but it's not just that they're safe while they're in our custody, because some are there for 2 years and some are there for life. But as you mentioned, over 20,000 a year getting out, that's a staggering number.
Yeah.
Over 80% of those in our population right now will be back in the community one day. So recognizing that, whether you do it, for the sake of the individual's second chance or not, sure, let's do it for public safety, because if they come back, there is a victim most often tied to their return to prison.
Joining me is Secretary of Corrections, Ricky Dixon. We've got a lot to talk about. He'll be here most of the hour. You're on the morning show with Preston Scott. And with us, Secretary of Corrections, Ricky Dixon. Let's quantify then versus now some of the things that have happened internally with corrections and some of the opportunities you've had to improve things for workers to begin with.
Well, I enjoyed speaking with you about a year ago, and we were kind of in the recovery mode then, and we've advanced so much in just a year from where we were then. A credit to, again, the governor and the House and Senate leadership. So specifically as it relates to legislative wins last year, one of the most significant areas of improvement was salaries. So that's made a remarkable improvement at our ability to recruit and retain staff. And I can tell you, and we'll get into other things related to reentry, I know later in the show, but it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's hard to concentrate on self-actualization if you're looking for food and water. Yeah. And that was kind of us. We're trying to do a good job with education, programming, all these other areas that are important. But we were, dying on the vine in terms of staffing and, especially following COVID and some of the impacts that this profession and others were having in general. So our recovery in that area is first and foremost important to be successful in every other area. Mm-hmm. So getting those significant pay increases, becoming competitive with other law enforcement agencies and other employers in general in the various areas of the state. Well on our way to recovery. There was a time we had about 6,000 vacancies. We're down to just over 2,000 right now. So
that's
we're working that down fast. Now, some of that was due to we forfeited some positions due to the population drop, but most of that is recovery. And that, again, is a credit to our lawmakers recognizing the need to take action in that area and restore the system. And their good work is paying huge dividends for us.
The vastness, I think, people don't fully understand. You talked about the sheer numbers of incarcerated people. That's spread across how many facilities?
Well, it's 49 prisons, but under those prisons or under those wardens, there's various units. So we have about 145 various fenced-in areas across Florida. But 49 wardens leading 49 complexes, and so in addition to I mentioned the pay, but a large part of that success last year in the legislature too was 215 educators in our system. Our education buildings have been sitting empty for years, and with that additive, we're going to fill every education and every vocational building in Florida. And just again, so much credit to the House and Senate leadership. Specifically, I had the first conversation. The first time I ever talked to President Pasadoma, she expressed an interest in improving in education, asked a lot of questions, and sure delivered on everything that she mentioned with support from the House and, of course, the governor's approval. That 215 positions is a game changer. We celebrated 20 positions we received about 3 years ago, and we couldn't fill them. We filled about 5 because of the salary. Yeah. So not only giving us or adding 215 teachers to the system, but taking the pay up to around $50,000 a year so we could be competitive with local school districts. We've already hired about 170 of those 215 positions in this short period of time. So we're well on our way to.
My transformation in thinking, Secretary Dixon, came from this. Well, there's the way that things ought to be, but then there's the way that things are. And I think for many people listening today, getting to that reality nugget that there are going to be this many people becoming citizens, returning to communities, this is a reality. Whatever you think things ought to be, this is a reality. Now, what are we going to do about it? To me, is the fundamental question that corrections is charged with answering.
It really is. And again, these statistics are staggering. And another one that shocks me always is realizing that about 6,000 to 7,000 individuals come to us a year with less than a year to serve. So the turnaround that happens through our system and the churn is amazing. Yeah.
More with Secretary Ricky Dixon when we come back, 16 past the hour. 21 minutes after the hour. This sounds like music where we ought to be talking about corrections. I don't know why. It just, call me an idiot. Most people do. Welcome back. Morning Show with Preston Scott. Secretary of Corrections, Ricky Dixon with me, and we're talking, we've got another 3 segments here. Let's talk about one facility where you have kind of brought a lot of your ideas on staffing and support and gathering inmates of a certain type in one spot. What's a little differently?
We learned so much. This was kind of born out of desperation several years ago, probably going back 5 or 6 years ago, when we didn't really see any help in sight in terms of some of the resources that have come our way in recent years. And we just realized we need to find a way to manage the population differently, to use incentives to get the cooperative behavior that we were seeking. And so what we started doing was, and it's different than other states. A lot of states solely categorize on escape risk, violence risk, and things like that, and we still do that too. But we put a very remarkable impact on their behavior. So we focus a lot on their behavior, and I brag a lot about our incentivized prisons. We're up to about 8 of those now, where we take individuals who have gone 2 years without a disciplinary report, and we put them with like-minded individuals that want to focus on education and self-betterment.
They want to
programming.
get better.
Right. So that has worked remarkably well on that side of the house. But what will happen if you do that is you'll leave behind in these other prisons a more dangerous individual. And so the counterbalance to the incentivized was, we determined that we were going to remove those that distract others from doing well, those that create violence, those that kind of call the shots, so to speak. And we were going to identify them and put them in a location altogether.
Now, on the surface, some would say, oh boy, you're putting, gasoline and fire in the same spot.
And I had those thoughts myself.
Sure.
When we talked about this, we had a lot of conversations about how dangerous is this to take, because what we're essentially doing is taking the most dangerous inmates in Florida and putting them together in one prison. And that sounds pretty dangerous, and it would be if we didn't do what we did at the time and add all the necessary resources to keep it safe.
Okay.
So with limited resources, we really beefed up our staffing in that prison. We beefed up our programming, and we keep, and also our security mechanisms, our fencing, our metal detectors. So we hardened that prison for a hardened individual. And the message basically is, if you get selected to go here, you're going to be there for a long time, at least a year to 2 years, maybe more, until you cooperate with the programming, and not just any programming targeted to their needs, anger management, those type of needs that aren't met in those individuals selected to be there. We keep them busy from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed. They're searched everywhere they go. They walk in straight lines. It's a very structured facility. Here's the remarkable thing that happened with with this initiative is, now we've got what should be the most dangerous prison in Florida operating in the most safe way with the least amount of violence almost compared to our other prisons. So what we prove to ourselves and others is resources matter. If you appropriately staff a prison, offering the deterrence needed to properly supervise and watch all of the areas, and if you appropriately program a prison and keep the population busy all day long, you have remarkable results in terms of programming. We also applied a program called 7 Habits and others there as well, where we've seen almost a 75% reduction in disciplinary reports.
Wow.
And things like that. So we're seeing good results from the population management strategies that our leadership have worked so intently on for the last several years.
And the nice thing about this isn't theory. You're able to quantify results and measure it.
Absolutely.
How much of that impacts what you're trying to do now moving forward?
It was we started this back at a time when we thought that would be the only solution in sight. So now that we have the 215 additional teachers, all the good work that FFCE is doing, it complements so well and works so well to support and reinforce all of the rehabilitative and reentry initiatives we had. Another initiative we're doing is, as we recognize the importance of moving individuals closer to home prior to release. And logistically, that's tough in Florida, knowing that 60% of the population comes from the south, 60% of the prisons are in the north. So there's some mathematical issues there that work against us. But we are thinking through that and being strategic in the way we create wings and dorms to the extent we can, and this is a work in progress, get those individuals back closer to home within a year of release, where now our volunteer efforts can be with more intent and not just individuals coming in to help mentor others, but mentor others that are getting out in their area, in their local areas.
When we come back, we're going to take the final 2 segments and we're going to talk strictly about the legislative session that's underway and specific needs that exist moving forward, the things that need to be done. And folks, this is your communities. all of this impacts where you live, anywhere in the state of Florida, even South Georgia. This impacts you as well. So we'll talk more with Secretary of Corrections Ricky Dixon on the Morning Show with Preston Scott. We are talking about the Department of Corrections with Secretary Ricky Dixon on the Morning Show with Preston Scott. We're in the midst of the legislative session. Lawmakers making decisions. Budgetary conferences are going to be beginning soon. We talked about success and what that looks like. And sometimes it is defined by you need to have resources in personnel, in staffing, in programming, and that comes down to taxpayer money. What are the things that will keep the trajectory moving in the direction that you now know works?
Sure. First of all, the governor's recommendations were amazing this year in support of the things that we need. Obviously, continue with the pay for the correctional officers. We do have a $5,000 additive at 15 of our hard-to-fill facilities that we're trying to sustain, so that's important. As it relates to reducing inmate idleness and the teachers, I don't really have a request there related to people because of the good work that was done last year. Mm-hmm. But I need to stand them up now and make them successful with IT needs, information technology, improving our computer systems, not just for
hardware.
The sake of education, but hardware, infrastructure, and those type of things. So we have a significant information technology request this year in. As it relates to infrastructure, our big focus this year is on physical plant needs. We need our buildings, from interiors to the envelopes of the buildings.
How old are we talking some of these buildings are that are in need?
Anywhere from 1913 to today, and periods of time. A lot of these prisons have had additional buildings built, so it's a hodgepodge of different different ages or legacy periods when these buildings were built.
Okay. So the plant needs exist statewide.
They do, and we're at that stage of the legislative session where you get anxious and you start seeing different things on paper in different branches of government, but it looks pretty good right now. So I know they've got to get together and work out where we land. Probably the largest dollar items on the board right now are those related to the physical plant.
And the importance of that for not just the workers, but for the inmates.
The living conditions are important. Conditions impact behavior for sure. We have you can see that now in our prisons with like individuals in terms of custody levels and different types of living environments, and we just have better success in those buildings that are perform better. So we've got a lot of work to do there, and there's a recognition of that. And I give again, I don't want to name names. I'll leave people out, but the responsiveness from our senators and many of our representatives that have actually spent a lot of time in our prisons seeing some of these issues, you just can't understand it on a spreadsheet or hearing me talk about it or on a phone call. You've got to be there and see it, and they have done a remarkable job coming out and putting eyes on it. And again, we have a lot of champions that are working with us in that area. Do you have an idea how many lawmakers, like percentage-wise of the House and the Senate, have actually been to some of the facilities? I wouldn't say it's 50%, but probably not that high. But those that do are faithful. A lot of them are. And let me mention this too, if I can. Community corrections resources this year, as it relates to the budget. I often the prison side gets a lot more focus, but they do such a remarkable job. First of all, helping us determine who needs to be in prison and who does not. Either those that are post-release that have been in prison and get out, those that haven't been to prison yet. And for everyone they're successful with, I promise you, per diem on community corrections is much less than per diem inside of our prison. But there's a safety aspect too, and their ability to identify who needs to go and to work with the judiciary to make those decisions are they're kind of some unsung heroes as well of our system and do a remarkable job. So we're asking this year for radios for them so we can communicate and know they're safe, firearms for them considering the neighborhoods they go in this day and time, uniforms for them. So a big lift in the community correction side, and they've got their champions as well in the House and Senate that have really paid attention to their needs. I think it's important. My challenge to any lawmaker and the staff, the aides that are listening out there is do what I've done. Visit facilities. See for yourself. Form your own opinions. Like the secretary said, spreadsheets don't get it done. This is important. Again, these people are coming back to these communities, and these facilities are hubs in those communities for workers,
for staffing. And so that's my challenge to you. We're going to come back, talk a little bit more with the Secretary of Corrections, Ricky Dixon, on the Morning Show with Preston Scott. 41 minutes past the hour. It's not for the faint of heart. You know, it's kind of like growing old. Growing old's not for sissies. You know, and this line of work is not for the faint of heart. Corrections Secretary Ricky Dixon with us in studio this morning on the Morning Show with Preston Scott. You got to be really happy and proud of the staff and how they've really adjusted to a vision that is broader than what they might have had previously.
Very, very proud of the staff. Can't do it without them, and they are they do amazing work every day in a very, very difficult environment. We ask a lot of them,
sure,
especially with some of the staff shortages that we've had. But again, retention is reflecting that they're happier, and we focused a lot on, money's a short-term motivator. It's very important. They have to have competitive salaries, but more importantly, they're equally as important. You have to enjoy where you work and believe you're there for a purpose and have a reason to do what you do. And so I think our work environments have improved significantly in the last year or two. So,
and in the last segment, talking about the physical plant, talking about uniforms, the tools needed to be successful. As you mentioned, it's not all just cash. Cash does end up buying those improvements and buying those needed things.
Yeah, correct. We're very fortunate, as you mentioned, the tools necessary from X-ray machines to metal detectors. We've had a lot of success lately in getting those things, but setting the conditions is I really credit our leadership for focusing on the family atmosphere, morale, esprit de corps, doing those things that make the shifts and the teams feel like family and want to be there every day. I think we kind of lost sight of that along the way several years back, and we've brought a lot of those things back. Employee appreciation days, things like that, large events across the state where we bring legislators out to stand and thank them and recognize them, and just doing a lot of things and keeping it churning and doing things differently to make sure the staff know they're important.
I was going to ask, how do you vision cast? For example, what does the next year look like when you're in an industry that's perpetual? Yeah, there's a calendar and yeah, there's a legislative session, but it never stops in your world. Ever.
It doesn't, but I think thanks to the legislature and the governor, they're taking our excuses away. It's been real easy for the department in the past to point fingers and say, well, oh, it's me, we don't have the resources we need. And it's why we did some of the population management strategies I mentioned earlier. But we have been, with their help, so successful in the last few years, we're not going to have that excuse much longer. So vision casting, we're at a point where we've got to tie all these ends together. We're doing so many great things in so many silos right now, and we've got to just really start tying these pieces together. When I mention that, I think about the Florida Foundation for Correctional Excellence. I think about PRIDE, our prison industry program. I think about our educational efforts, our career and technical efforts, and I just want to make sure that that all these different sections doing good work, or the work's complementary to each other, and we're not competing for different population sets. And one thing I want to really work on is we're working right now as we speak on one of the most robust strategic plans we've ever developed, centered around programming. And some things we don't know right now that we should know is our target populations for various needs, substance abuse, GED, career and technical welding programs, masonry programs. And so what we're trying to do, because it's not fair to say, well, you've only got 2,000 seats in a certain area and you've got 80,000 or 85,000 inmates in your system. All of those 85,000 inmates may not need that specific program.
Right.
So we're laying out metrics relative to all of the needs in our system. We do a real good job of risk and needs assessment, determining what you need when you come to prison. In the past, we haven't done a good job of delivering or meeting that need. So we're kind of parsing that out now and making sure that we have good metrics to ensure that these staff resources we have are applied in the right areas. So if we need to shift from education over to career and technical, or career and technical to substance use, and identify any shortcomings we have as well. But so that is a large part of what we're working on right now, in conjunction with the other areas I mentioned, with getting inmates closer to home, to the right places to meet these program needs.
As I said, it never, ever stops.
Never ends. And trying to keep violence down in the meantime as well.
Yeah, and by the way, yeah, right. Thanks so much for making time.
Glad to be here.
You know that the studios are open anytime you want.
Appreciate you.
Thanks. Ricky Dixon is the Secretary of Corrections for the state of Florida. Our guest And yes, this will be a Conversations podcast on the Morning Show with Preston Scott.